Egypt was a world built on permanence. Its monuments carved from stone meant to outlast memory itself. Its pharaohs dressed in gold and proclaimed as gods walking the earth beneath a burning desert sky. The Nile moved slowly through it all, wide and dark and indifferent, feeding the black soil of the delta where a people lived who were not free. They were Israel, hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children, and they had lived under the heel of Egypt for 400 years, long enough for the grandchildren of the grandchildren to have never known anything else. They carried mud bricks in the sun. They built cities they would never own. They buried their fathers in foreign soil. And they prayed, sometimes boldly, sometimes as barely more than a breath, a whisper in the dark, to a God they had been told was their God, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob. But it was hard, some nights, to hold on to that. Moses knew both worlds. Raised in Pharaoh's palace, then exiled to the desert, then called back by a voice from a burning bush that was not consumed. He had stood before Pharaoh. He had stretched out his staff. He had watched 9 plagues tear through Egypt like the unraveling of a tapestry. Water turned to blood, frogs, lice, flies, the death of livestock, boils, hail, locusts, and 3 days of darkness so thick a person could feel it pressing against their skin. And still Pharaoh would not let them go. Now a 10th plague was coming, and this one would cost everything. The instructions came through Moses with a weight and a tenderness that is hard to describe. God told Israel what was about to happen, not to frighten them, but to prepare them. And the preparation itself was unlike anything they had ever been asked to do. Every family was to take a lamb, not just any lamb, one without blemish, a year old, chosen and set apart on the 10th day of the month, and kept until the 14th. They were to know this animal. And on the evening of the 14th day of Nisan, as the sun tilted toward the horizon and the sky over the delta turned the color of hammered copper, they were to slaughter it. The blood was to be painted on the doorframes of their houses, on the 2 side posts and on the top beam, the lintel, using a branch of hyssop, a small wild plant with soft leaves, the kind that grew in the cracks of walls and along the edges of roads. The humblest of tools for the most sacred of acts. And then they were to roast the lamb with fire, whole, none of it broken, and eat it standing up, sandals on their feet, staffs in their hands, cloaks tucked into their belts, ready to move. This meal had a name. God called it the Passover. The Lord would move through Egypt that night, and death would come to every firstborn, human and animal, in every house where the blood was not on the door. But where the blood was, he would pass over. He would see it, and he would protect. Picture what that evening looked like on the ground. The Israelite families moving through their homes with bowls of blood and hyssop branches. Children asking questions. Grandmothers weeping quietly at what was coming, even though it was not coming for them. Fathers with trembling hands pressing the wet hyssop to the rough wood of the doorframe, the blood dark and real against the grain. And then the sitting down together, hurriedly, anxiously, but together, to eat lamb roasted over fire, with bitter herbs and unleavened bread that hadn't had time to rise, because there was no time left in Egypt for things to rise slowly. No one in Israel slept easily that night. How could they? They sat in their lamplight, listening, waiting. The lamb they had cared for was now on the table. The blood of it was on their door. And somewhere out there in the dark, something holy and terrible was moving. You can imagine the children gripping the sleeves of their parents. You can imagine men sitting very still, not speaking, hearing only the fire crackling and the sound of their own heartbeats. And then, sometime deep in the watches of the night, in that hour when the darkness is most absolute, Egypt began to scream. The cry that rose from Egypt that night was unlike anything the ancient world had recorded before. Pharaoh himself woke to it. In his palace, in his gilded rooms, with all of his power and all of his gods. He woke to the cry of his kingdom coming apart. His firstborn son was dead, and it was the same in every house in Egypt from the palace to the prison. The firstborn of every family, the firstborn of every animal in the field. There was not a house where someone was not dead. And Pharaoh, this man who had refused 9 times, this man who had hardened his heart and called Moses a fool and sent him away and called him back and sent him away again. Pharaoh rose in the night, the scripture says, and he summoned Moses and Aaron, and his voice, when it finally came, was broken. Go. Take your people, take your flocks and your herds. Go, and bless me also. Asterisk. Not a command, a plea. And Israel moved. They had already packed. They were already dressed. The unleavened dough was wrapped in cloth on their shoulders before it had time to rise. Their neighbors, the Egyptians themselves, pressed silver and gold and clothing into their hands as they left, as though trying somehow to make right what 400 years had made wrong. 600,000 men walked out of Egypt that night, plus women and children. The number strains the imagination. And with them came a mixed multitude, others who had attached themselves to Israel, and flocks and herds, a great weight of living things moving together in the dark. God led them, a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night, light enough to walk by, presence enough to follow. They did not walk out ashamed. They did not creep away in the dark like fugitives. The scripture says they went out with a high hand, boldly, visibly, under the watch of a nation in mourning. And 430 years, to the very day, after their ancestors had come into Egypt, they left it, not because Pharaoh finally decided to be merciful, because the Lord kept his promise. There is something at the center of this story that goes deeper than the plagues, deeper than the miracles, deeper even than the scale of it. 600,000 families finding their legs and learning to walk as free people. It is the hyssop branch, the small thing, the humble tool dipped in blood and pressed against rough wood by ordinary hands. God could have protected Israel in any way imaginable, in fire, in thunder, in the voice that shook Sinai. But he asked them to do something, to trust, to mark their doors, to eat standing up, to believe that the blood on the outside of the house meant something, even though the night was dark and the morning wasn't certain yet. Faith, this story tells us, is rarely asked of us in grand gestures. It is usually asked in small ones, in the reaching for the hyssop branch, in the staying at the table when everything in you wants to run, in the eating of the meal before you can see how the story ends. And there is a grace in this, a breathtaking grace, that God looked at those marked doors and passed over them. Not because the people behind them were perfect, not because they had never doubted or despaired or wondered if he had forgotten them in the mud, but because the blood was there and the promise was sure, and he is the kind of God who keeps his word. The lamb was slain, the blood was applied, and morning came.